The wind howled across the endless white, a voice older than nations, older even than memory. Dr. Elias Vargas stood at the edge of the drilling pit, his breath a pale ghost rising in the frigid air, and tried not to think of his father. The ice had claimed him 2 years ago, in a mission not unlike this one. Elias had sworn never to return to this continent of silence and secrets, yet here he was, staring down into a wound carved through kilometers of frozen history. Captain Marcus Hale approached with the deliberate weight of a man who trusted boots and bullets more than microscopes. His visor was up, revealing a weathered face set in lines of suspicion. "We've hit something," he said, voice clipped. He wasn't excited, not like the scientists. To him, every discovery was another hazard waiting to gut the unprepared. Jonas Reeve was already climbing out of the pit, his gloves dusted in frost, eyes shining with the thrill of discovery. "Not rock, not ice, not anything I've ever logged. It's smooth, metallic, but the density..." He stopped, shaking his head as though words failed. "You need to see it yourself." Elias followed them into the shaft. The walls around him shimmered with trapped air bubbles and ancient sediment, layers upon layers of forgotten epochs. At the bottom lay the object, half buried, half revealed. Under the harsh light of flood lamps, it glinted in dull defiance against the encasing frost. Its surface was strange, like hammered bronze yet seamless, bearing etchings that curled in patterns both geometric and unnervingly organic. He crouched, brushing at the surface with a gloved hand. The symbols were faint, but familiar, echoing motifs he had seen painted on cavern walls across continents, thousands of years apart. His pulse quickened. He thought of his father's journals, filled with sketches of spirals and figures, cryptic notations that hinted at a forgotten unity in human prehistory. "This doesn't belong here," Elias murmured. Jonas grinned, as though the impossible were his favorite companion. "Exactly. Which means it's ours to study. The world's about to change." Hale stepped forward, every inch of him radiating disapproval. "Or it's contaminated, unstable, dangerous. You don't even know what it is." His hand lingered on the sidearm strapped to his leg, as though the object might suddenly leap at them. "My orders are clear. Nothing gets thawed until containment protocols are in place." Elias straightened, meeting Hale's gaze. "If we delay, the ice could fracture. We might lose structural integrity around the pit." It wasn't entirely true, but the urgency in his voice made Hale narrow his eyes. Jonas seized the moment. "We can manage a controlled thaw, minimal risk. Just enough to expose it fully. Think about it, Captain, this could predate human civilization. If we wait for bureaucrats to approve a research plan, we'll be dead before the first lab report." Hale's jaw tightened, and for a moment the only sound was the creak of settling ice. Finally, he said, "I don't like this. But fine. No one touches it until I clear the procedure." "Understood." Jonas nodded too quickly. Elias simply inclined his head. But even as Hale climbed back out of the shaft, Elias knew the words meant little to Jonas. Curiosity burned too brightly in the young geologist's veins, untamable as fire. Later that night, while the base groaned in the shifting cold, Elias sat in the mess hall, reviewing data logs. His thoughts drifted to his father again, to the day when his expedition had sent its last transmission, a garbled warning swallowed by static. Official records had declared it an accident, but Elias had never accepted that. Now, staring at the anomalous readings from the drill site, he felt the same unease creep into his bones. What had his father uncovered before the ice took him? A klaxon buzzed faintly in the background, a routine signal of pressure fluctuations. He ignored it until he realized it was coming from the drilling chamber. Rising, he hurried down the steel corridor, his boots ringing against the floor. The chamber door was unlocked. Inside, flood lamps bathed the pit in harsh light. Jonas was crouched near the anomaly, a portable heater humming beside him. A thin veil of mist curled off the ice, evaporating under the artificial warmth. "Jonas," Elias hissed. "What are you doing?" Jonas glanced up, sheepish but unrepentant. "We'll never get another chance like this. Look at it, the The surface is responding. There's depth, structure inside. It's not just an artifact, Elias. It's shaped. Elias stepped closer despite himself. The thawed patches revealed contours beneath the frost, the faint suggestion of a face, a hand, armor etched with the same symbols that traced across the surface. His breath caught. This was no relic of stone or metal. It was a man. Jonas whispered, almost reverent. Perfectly preserved. Not fossilized, not skeletal. Flesh and bone frozen for God knows how long. Elias's mind reeled. The implications defied reason, yet the evidence lay bare before him. A human, clad in regalia no history recorded, entombed in ice older than civilizations. He imagined his father kneeling before a similar discovery, overwhelmed and undone by the enormity of it. "Turn it off," Elias said, voice strained. "If Hale finds out." But the heater hummed on, and the frost retreated another inch. The figure within grew clearer, and with it, an inexplicable dread. This was no accident of preservation. This was deliberate. Someone long ago had placed him here. From above, a heavy tread shook the metal catwalk. Hale's voice thundered down. "What the hell are you two doing?" Jonas froze. Elias looked up, words scrambling in his throat. But Hale had already seen enough. His eyes narrowed as the shape inside the ice resolved under the lamplight, a silhouette both eerily human and unnervingly alien in its adornment. For once, even his military certainty faltered. The three men stood in silence, each grappling with the enormity of what lay entombed before them. The ice, ancient and patient, had kept its secret for millennia. Now, by their own hands, they had begun to break the seal. And deep within the frozen mass, the faintest crack spread across the surface, like a whisper in glass. The crack spread in slow motion, fracturing the glossy surface of the ice with a sound like brittle bones snapping. Jonas scrambled backward, his boots slipping on the damp floor, while Elias felt his stomach knot with a dread that words could not anchor. Hale descended into the pit with the grim precision of a soldier. Pistol drawn though, he must have known a bullet meant nothing against what stirred beneath them. The last shard of frost sloughed off in a curtain of mist. A man lay revealed, tall, broad-shouldered, clothed in armor that shimmered with dull luster, etched with the same spiraling sigils Elias had traced earlier. His skin was pale, unblemished, and far too whole for someone buried tens of thousands of years. He looked not like a corpse but like a sleeper in the act of dreaming. "Back away," Hale ordered, voice sharp enough to cut through the heavy silence. "Now." Jonas obeyed only halfway, his eyes riveted. "Do you see it? He's human. He has to be." Elias crouched near the slab, his fingers itching to reach out, though fear anchored him. He had spent years excavating brittle fragments of bone, shards of pottery, whispers of lives long extinguished. But this was a man, preserved against time itself. He murmured, "Impossible. He's older than civilization itself. Yet look at him." The figure's chest rose. Just slightly, but enough to steal every word from Elias's tongue. A hiss escaped Jonas, half laughter, half terror. Hale swore under his breath and lifted his weapon, as though the act of pointing steel could steady his disbelief. The lights overhead flickered once, then again, casting the chamber into a staccato of shadow and glare. Equipment beeped erratically, screens spitting out nonsense data, temperature spikes, anomalous vibrations, magnetic interference. Elias's training told him these were systems malfunctions, but some instinct whispered otherwise. The disturbance radiated from the figure itself, a pulse that made the air hum like a struck chord. The man's eyes snapped open. They glowed faintly, not with fire but with a pallid luminescence that seemed more memory than light. Hale tightened his grip on the pistol, but he did not fire. Jonas took a trembling step forward, his voice breaking with awe. "He's alive." Elias's heart thundered in his chest. The eyes looked straight through him, through all of them, as if measuring their worth. Then the lids fluttered, and the glow dimmed. The man's body shuddered violently, a rasping gasp tearing from his throat as the last of the ice fractured and fell away. Elias surged forward, instincts overriding caution. He caught the man before he struck the ground, the weight shockingly solid, the flesh warm. His training screamed this was wrong, that no body should have retained such heat after millennia encased in ice, yet denial seemed absurd in the face of living proof. "Help me," Elias called, his voice tight. To his credit, Hale holstered the weapon and stepped in, though suspicion carved deep furrows in his brow. Together they hauled the stranger onto a padded mat Jonas had dragged over. The man coughed, spasms racking his chest, shards of ice rattling to the floor. His breaths came ragged but steady, each one proof that Elias was not hallucinating. Jonas rushed to set up scanners, his hands shaking too badly to operate the controls smoothly. The display filled with data streams, pulse, oxygenation, neural activity. Numbers spiked and dipped in erratic waves, but there was no denying the pattern of life. "Human," Jonas whispered, as though the word itself were salvation. "Chromosomes intact. Mitochondrial markers match. Elias, he's one of us." "Impossible," Elias said, yet even as he spoke, his throat tightened around the word. Hale stood over them, arms crossed, eyes hard as the surrounding ice. "You're both fools if you think this is just a man. Nothing sleeps under ice for 40,000 years and wakes up breathing." A low vibration thrummed through the chamber, subtle yet unmistakable. Elias felt it in his teeth, a resonance deeper than sound, as though the glacier itself had spoken. The lights dimmed further, their glow sickly and unstable. Jonas glanced around, unease finally cracking through his exhilaration. "That's not seismic activity. It's coming from him." The man stirred, his lips parting as if to form words. What came out was not language, but a string of sounds, guttural, fractured, yet deliberate. His eyes fixed on Elias, and in that gaze Elias felt a demand, a plea, and a warning tangled into one. Elias swallowed hard. He remembered his father's scrawled notes, half-legible lines about frozen watchers and the burden of guardianship. His pulse raced as the possibility sank in that this figure, this man, might be bound to those same half-mad words. Hale leaned closer, his voice edged like a blade. "If he can speak, he can answer. Ask him what he is." Elias opened his mouth, uncertain what language might bridge the abyss of time. Before he could form a sound, the stranger convulsed, his back arching, his cry echoing against steel and ice alike. Equipment screamed in protest, sparks leaping from overloaded circuits. Jonas stumbled backward, shielding his face from the sudden burst of static energy. Hale drew his weapon again but hesitated, torn between instinct and reason. Then, as abruptly as it began, the convulsion ceased. The man collapsed onto the mat, chest heaving, breath shallow. His eyes closed, the pale glow extinguished, leaving only the fragile weight of a body caught between death and life. The silence that followed was worse than the chaos. Elias realized he was gripping the man's wrist, feeling the weak thrum of a pulse beneath his fingertips. Proof of life, fragile and undeniable. Jonas broke the silence first, his voice hushed. "We brought him back. We actually brought him back." Hale holstered his pistol again, but the look he cast downward was anything but relieved. His voice was low, grim, and certain.
"No.
We didn't bring him back. We unleashed him." Above them, the glacier groaned as if in agreement, the sound reverberating through the steel girders of the base. Elias felt the weight of the ice pressing in, a reminder that secrets buried so deep rarely surfaced without consequence. He did not say aloud what he knew in his marrow, that whatever had been preserved here was not meant for them to find. Yet the choice had been made, the thaw begun, and there could be no turning back. The man on the mat shuddered once more, a faint whisper spilling from his lips. Elias bent close, straining to catch it. He could not recognize the tongue, but the tone chilled him, half warning, half lament. And as the final echoes faded, the lights flickered again, plunging them for an instant into perfect, suffocating darkness. Kale's breathing steadied, each inhale ragged but undeniable, a rhythm that stitched him to the present. Elias knelt beside him, half mesmerized, half horrified, unable to reconcile the reality of warm flesh with the knowledge that this man had been entombed in ice before humanity's first cities had risen. Jonas hovered nearby, muttering fragments of disbelief, his hands twitching as though to seize a tablet or a pen and trap the miracle in data. Hale stood apart, arms crossed, his face carved from suspicion. He alone seemed unimpressed by the wonder. For him, everything unexplained was a potential enemy. When Kale's eyes opened again, they did not glow. They were merely human, gray and searching, though their intensity made Elias feel like an intruder trespassing in a place sacred and forbidden. The man struggled to sit upright, his movements slow but deliberate. Hale moved to intervene, but Kale raised a trembling hand, palm outward, a gesture that transcended language. Not an attack, but a plea for patience. He spoke, words rough and halting, syllables pulled from the depths of a language no one living should have known. Elias leaned forward, straining to parse meaning. The sounds were alien, yet something about their cadence scraped at his memory, echoing the symbols carved into the artifact's surface. Elias grabbed a marker and scribbled them onto the nearest surface, tracing their flow. Kale watched him, eyes narrowing as though testing his recognition. Slowly, he mimicked Elias's motion, pointing from the scrawled glyphs to his chest. "Kale," he said, voice hoarse. Then he pointed to Elias, expectant. "Elias," he answered, his voice nearly breaking on the syllables. Jonas rushed in, tapping his own chest with a grin too wide for the situation. "Jonas." Kale repeated it, though the vowels warped in his mouth. Then his gaze turned to Hale. The captain hesitated, then gave a curt nod. "Hale." The names settled like stones dropped into water, ripples spreading between them. Kale exhaled sharply, as though acknowledging a pact. Then, with slow, deliberate gestures, he drew in the air, an arching line, a spiral, a downward thrust. Elias's chest tightened. They were the same shapes his father had sketched obsessively, claiming they told a story that predated all myth. Elias pointed at the ground beneath them, then mimicked the spiral. "Here." Kale's reaction was immediate. He seized Elias's wrist, not with violence, but with startling urgency. His gaze bore into Elias, and for a heartbeat Elias thought he glimpsed oceans of grief in those gray eyes. Kale spoke again, this time with greater force, syllables like hammer strikes. One word repeated, harsh and insistent. Jonas recorded the sounds, feeding them into translation software. The program spat out gibberish, but fragments flickered. Lock, prison beneath. The vibration in the glacier intensified, a groan reverberating through steel and bone alike. Snow sifted from the ceiling of the chamber. Hale swore and scanned the shadows with military instinct, though no visible threat lurked. Kale saw their unease and forced himself upright despite his body's protests. He reached for the metal plating on his armor, tracing a spiral etched over his heart. Then he struck the ice beneath with a clenched fist, the gesture so fierce that Elias flinched. The meaning was undeniable. Something was caged below. Jonas's face lit with incredulity. "You're saying there's something under us?" "Something locked away." Kale nodded once, grimly. Elias's pulse thundered. His father's words resurfaced, written in uneven script across yellowed pages. They did not die. They buried what they could not kill. They chose watchers, frozen in time, guardians of the seal. The air grew colder, unnaturally so, their breaths misting more heavily than before. The lights buzzed, dimmed, and for an instant Elias swore he saw movement beyond the frosted glass of the observation deck, shadows that had no source. Kale spoke again, voice taut with warning. Elias could not translate, but the intent was clear. The ice was weakening, the lock failing. Jonas shook his head, refusing. "This is madness. If there was some great civilization, some prison older than history, we'd have evidence. Cities, tools, anything." Kale's gaze flicked to him, not with anger but pity. He tapped his temple, then gestured to the darkness pressing in from the walls, as though to say, "Not everything leaves ruins in stone. Some things linger in thought." Hale stepped forward, his voice a low growl. "Enough riddles. If there's a threat under our feet, then we deal with it. You're telling me you were buried here to stop it? That's why you're alive." Cale met his stare with a weary nod. Elias's throat tightened. The enormity of it pressed down like the glacier above. If Cale spoke truth, then humanity had faced this terror before, long before history, and won only by sacrifice. If the ice was truly the lock, then their drilling, their curiosity, had been the chisel cracking it open. The ground quivered beneath them, subtle but steady. Instruments shrieked with readings that defied calibration: energy spikes, pressure fluctuations, localized gravitational anomalies. Jonas stared at the data, pale and trembling now. This can't be right. It's as if the ice is resonating with something deeper, something moving. Hale drew his weapon again, though the gesture seemed pitiful against forces that warped the air itself. "If it comes through, we fight. Simple as that." Elias shook his head. "No. If Cale is right, it can't be fought. It can only be contained." Cale's gaze turned to him, approving but sorrowful. He placed a hand on Elias's chest, then pointed downward, repeating the same word again, low, deliberate, final. Jonas whispered the translation attempt, his voice brittle with disbelief. "Prison." The chamber shuddered violently, a booming crack echoing through the glacier. Somewhere deep below, ice gave way with the sound of 1,000 years breaking at once. The floodlights flickered, sputtered, then steadied, though their glow seemed weaker than before, swallowed by encroaching dark. Elias looked at Cale, at Hale, at Jonas. They were no longer explorers, no longer scientists or soldiers. They were witnesses to a story older than memory, dragged into a conflict that had waited in silence for millennia. Cale's eyes met his once more, and in them Elias saw both a promise and a demand. The time of watchers had come again. And above, the ice groaned like a beast stirring from a dream, as though the prison door had begun to open. The walls shuddered, as if the ice itself had drawn breath. Frost fractured in spiderweb lines across the chamber ceiling, and a hollow roar rolled upward from beneath their feet. Elias staggered, clutching the railing, his mind torn between awe and terror. Jonas stared into the darkness with wide, fevered eyes, while Hale snapped into motion, barking orders though there were no soldiers left to obey him. Cale braced himself against the floor, his face etched with a strain of centuries pressing down upon him. He pointed downward again, shouting a word Elias could now feel more than hear. Prison. Elias's stomach turned as comprehension solidified. The glacier was no passive vault. It was the lock itself, and their meddling had splintered it. The air vibrated with whispers, subtle at first, then swelling into a cacophony that seemed to bleed from the ice. Elias heard his father's voice among them, calling his name, pleading, condemning. He clamped his hands over his ears, but the sound was inside him, not around him. Jonas dropped to his knees, laughing and sobbing at once, his mind unraveling in the tide of illusions. "Stay focused," Hale roared, seizing Elias by the collar, dragging him upright. His eyes were bloodshot but fierce. "Whatever this thing is, it's inside our heads. Don't listen. Don't let it in." A crack split the floor, spraying shards of frost like broken glass. From the fissure seeped a shadow darker than the absence of light, writhing, shifting, coalescing into forms that almost resembled figures, faces Elias knew, twisted by hunger and mockery. He felt his grip on reality slip, the boundary between thought and substance tearing apart. Cale moved with sudden purpose, ripping a fragment of his own armor free. It glowed faintly as he pressed it into Elias's hands, forcing him to clutch it. The moment Elias touched the relic, the whispers dulled, as though a veil had been pulled over his mind. Cale met his eyes, and Elias understood. This was protection, a shield against intrusion. Jonas, unprotected, staggered to his feet. His expression was serene now, disturbingly calm. Do you hear it? It's offering us knowledge. Everything we've lost, everything we've forgotten. We don't have to fear it. We can join it. His voice trembled with reverence. Hale stepped toward him, pistol raised. You're not thinking straight, Jonas. Snap out of it. But Jonas only smiled and turned toward the fisher. The shadows welcomed him like a tide, wrapping around his form, sinking into his skin. His body convulsed, twisted, then stilled. When he raised his head again, his eyes glowed with an inhuman light. Elias's chest tightened. Jonas was gone. The thing beneath the ice had claimed him as a vessel. The possessed form spoke, voice layered with countless others. The lock weakens. The jailers are dust. Humanity is unguarded. Hale fired. The shot cracked like thunder, striking Jonas squarely in the chest. He staggered, but the shadows absorbed the wound, knitting flesh back together in an instant. The voice laughed, a sound that made Elias's bones ache. Hale shoved Elias toward the exit, shouting in broken syllables. He gestured urgently, then sprinted toward the fisher himself, blade drawn from a sheath that had not existed moments before, as though willed back into being. He struck at the shadows, each blow sending ripples of pale fire across the darkness. Elias hesitated. Every instinct screamed at him to flee, but Hale's eyes caught his one last time, pleading and commanding all at once. He wanted Elias to follow, to help seal what they had unleashed. Hale didn't wait for debate. He grabbed Elias's shoulder and hauled him forward. Move. Now. They plunged deeper into the ice tunnels, following Hale's lead. The caverns writhed around them, walls shifting like the interior of a living beast. Whispers clawed at Elias's thoughts, but the relic pulsed warmly in his hand, keeping the worst of them at bay. Hale moved like a man already dead, his only purpose to shield Elias with each step. At last they burst into a vast chamber, a cathedral carved by ancient hands. Pillars of frozen stone ringed a central dais, upon which a monolithic structure sat dormant, metallic, crystalline, impossibly intricate. Hale fell to his knees before it, pressing both hands against its surface. Symbols ignited across its skin, flaring in cold blue light. The lock, Elias breathed. He could feel its purpose thrumming in his bones. This was the mechanism that held the creature captive, buried beneath endless ice. And it was failing. The shadows poured into the chamber after them, Jonas at their forefront, his face stretched into something no longer human. Hale raised his weapon again, though they both knew it would not be enough. He glanced at Elias, and in that moment, something unspoken passed between them. Get it done, Hale said simply. Then he charged. He met the shadows head-on, firing until his weapon clicked empty, then striking with his fists, his body swallowed in a storm of darkness. Elias wanted to cry out, to stop him, but Hale seized his wrist, dragging him toward the mechanism. Together, they pressed their palms to its surface, symbols blazing brighter with each heartbeat. The chamber shook, ice cracking above, water rushing in torrents down the walls. Jonas approached, his voice the chorus of countless damned. You cannot bind us again. You are but remnants of a forgotten age. We are eternal. Elias shut his eyes and poured every shred of will into the lock, guided by Hale's steady hand. The relic in his palm fused with the mechanism, light searing so bright it turned the shadows to smoke. Jonas screamed, a sound not of one voice but millions, before the light consumed him, burning his vessel to ash. The darkness shrieked and recoiled, dragged downward by unseen force. The fissure sealed, the ice reforged, the lock reawakened. Hale slumped, his body encased once more in a shell of frost that spread over him like a funeral shroud. He met Elias's eyes in final recognition before the glacier swallowed him again. Silence fell. The whispers ceased. Only the groan of settling ice remained. Elias staggered to his feet alone. Hale's sacrifice echoed in the empty chamber, and Jonas's smile haunted him. He touched the frozen surface of the lock, feeling its cold certainty. The prison was sealed, but not forever. Nothing was. Hours later, Elias emerged into the pale light of the surface world. The storm had passed, leaving the horizon sharp and endless. He recorded everything into his log, though doubt gnawed at him. Who would believe? Men frozen for millennia, prisons beneath the ice, shadows that feasted on thought. It would sound like madness. And yet, as he gazed out across the vast white, he knew the truth was not his to choose. The ice would hold its secrets again for now. But secrets had a way of thawing. He whispered into the stillness, as if to his father, as if to the world itself. The ice keeps what we're not meant to remember. God help us when it remembers again.